It was the last time she saw Christie alive. She thought everyone had forgotten, that no one cared anymore. The slaying of her teenage sister is as fresh today for Kim Mullins as it was when it happened nearly 4 decades ago, but she had accepted that answers might never come. Now she has hope. A girl out for a walk suddenly vanished under bizarre circumstances. Her mysterious disappearance and chilling discoveries left the entire nation in shock. This case became one of the most challenging and misunderstood stories in the history of criminal justice. But eventually, the final investigators unraveled the mystery, uncovering the truth behind the case. Will take us on a journey to explore these horrifying mysteries. Christie Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960 in Columbus, Ohio, and grew up in a large family with 5 children. They all lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. In the summer of 1975, when Christie was 14, she spent most of her time hanging out with her friends and her sisters. Their favorite spot was the pool at the nearby residential complex, especially on hot summer days. Sometimes she also worked as a babysitter, looking after the kids of people she knew. On August 22nd, one of them asked Christie to watch her child until late in the evening. The next day, Christie woke up around noon and began pondering what to do with her birthday just 5 days away. She was eagerly anticipating it, so time seemed to pass very slowly for her. The day turned out to be extremely hot, with temperatures soaring up to 93 degrees. So Christie quickly decided that going to the pool would be the best way to spend time and cool off. She brought along her younger sister, Kim. "You don't even like her. You said you would go to the pool with me," Kim Mullins pleaded with Christie that morning when Lisa telephoned Christie to go somewhere with her. Keeping her promise, Christie went to the pool with Kim shortly after lunchtime, but had not yet entered the water when Lisa showed up across the parking lot looking for Christie. After stopping by a white car to talk to 4 much older boys, none of whom Christie knew, Lisa came over to speak to Christie, and the 2 of them left the pool together. By now, Kim was preoccupied with swimming, and although she was surprised to see Christie leave without telling her, she decided she wasn't going to be a pesky little sister. It was the last time she saw Christie alive. Upon returning home, Kim hoped to find Christie there, but she was nowhere to be seen. With each passing hour without Christie's return, Kim's worry deepened. She resolved to search the streets for her sister and soon encountered a neighbor who informed her that the police had discovered the body of a girl a few miles away about an hour earlier, but they couldn't identify her. Filled with dread, Kim hurried home to share this distressing news with her parents. Overwhelmed with shock and heartache, Christie's parents immediately contacted the police to report their daughter missing. Their minds raced with worry, unable to comprehend what could have truly happened to their beloved daughter. They were directed to the morgue, where police officers showed them the body of the deceased girl, confirming her worst fears. It was indeed Christie. As Christie's identity was confirmed, a wave of anguish swept over her parents. The police's grim notification about the details of the incident only compounded their agony. Around 2:30 p.m., a man had called 911 to report the discovery of a human body in the wooded area behind the shopping center. He, accompanied by his wife and son, had been there to purchase a toy for their daughter. However, before entering the shopping center, their son had expressed a desire to take a stroll in the wooded area behind the building, an innocent choice that tragically led to a horrifying outcome, and they walked along this path into the depths of the forest. As the family was coming back, they noticed something strange happening a few yards off the trail. Upon closer inspection, they saw a man on the ground leaning over someone and striking them with a piece of wood. The father approached the spot and discovered a girl on the ground, covered in blood. His wife, who was undergoing medical training, tried to find a pulse on the victim but couldn't find one. The man ran to the shopping center and called the police from one of the stores. He and his wife provided investigators with a description of the perpetrator. He was a young, tall, slender man, around 20 years old, with long dark hair down to his shoulders. Based on their description, the police created a sketch of the suspect and distributed it to patrol officers. The crime scene examination yielded no results. Officers found the piece of wood used as the murder weapon. However, despite their efforts, the police couldn't find any leads to the perpetrator. There were some notable findings, such as the victim's hands being tied with a telephone cord. Despite conducting forensic examinations, there was no evidence of sexual assault. The police quickly honed in on a specific direction. Christie's younger sister disclosed that she had left the pool with friends, particularly Carol, prompting the police to interview her. Carol recounted that on that day, an unfamiliar man had called her home, claiming to be a DJ from a local radio station. He mentioned organizing a cheerleading competition in their town, with free tickets to the state fair for the winners. The caller stated that the event would be held behind the shopping center and would commence at 1:45 p.m., raising suspicions among the police. But what puzzled them even more was Carol's account that initially she and her sister had decided to go together. However, they encountered Christie and her sister along the way. After a brief conversation, Carol invited Christie to join them, and they continued toward the shopping center. Upon reaching the entrance to the woods, the two girls waited, but no one showed up. Carol decided to go to the shopping center to ask for the time. However, when she returned, Christie was gone. She waited for a while, but nobody appeared. Eventually, she left. The police found no evidence to support the claim of a cheerleading competition. They suspected that the caller might have been the killer attempting to lure Carol into the woods, or it could have been an unrelated prank. Nevertheless, the mystery remained unresolved. Unable to trace the call made it challenging to identify the caller. Additionally, investigators noticed discrepancies in Carol's story. While Carol claimed to have met Christie and her sister on their way to the shopping center, Kim insisted they were at the pool, and Carol approached them there. But that's not all. Later that same evening, Christie's mother encountered Carol, who lived just a few dozen meters away from their home. Their conversation was quite peculiar. Carol began by apologizing to the woman, stating that things shouldn't have escalated to this extent. She further mentioned that she was supposed to be the target, and there were two individuals involved in the murder. Shocked, Christie's mother attempted to gather more information, but Carol refused to continue the conversation and departed. The woman reported the incident to the authorities. The police were notified about the incident, and they proceeded to interview Carol once again. However, she denied making any such statements and insisted that her initial account was genuine. Subsequently, Carol underwent a re-examination with a polygraph test, which did not detect any signs of deception in her responses to key questions. Following this, investigators shifted their focus away from Carol and continued to pursue other leads. In the following days, as news of the brutal murder spread throughout the city, local residents were gripped by widespread fear, realizing that a dangerous criminal was still at large. Tensions escalated further as the police believed the killer to be a local resident, given their familiarity with the trail behind the shopping center. Detectives mobilized all available resources to apprehend the perpetrator. 3 days after Christie's death, there was a significant breakthrough in the case. Around 5 p.m., a police officer patrolling the streets of Columbus noticed something that caught his attention. It seems like Jack's situation is quite tense. The police are trying to determine if he's connected to Christie's case, although Jack struggles with communication. Despite a clear resemblance to the composite sketch, there isn't much information from Jack during the interrogation. They tried talking to him for 6 hours, but still didn't get much clarity. Hopefully, they'll find a fair and effective way to solve the case. Gradually, during the interrogation, the atmosphere in the room became increasingly tense. The detectives, determined to break Jack's silence, employed a systematic approach. As hours passed, the steady ticking of the clock echoed in the empty room. It was in this heightened pressure that Jack finally gave in. His words, though choked and disjointed, painted a vivid picture of the events leading to Christie's disappearance. Jack recounted the day with a haunting detachment. He described the mundane details of leaving his apartment and taking the uneventful bus ride to the shopping center. But amidst the ordinariness lay the mysterious encounter that would change everything. As he walked through the bustling parking lot, the afternoon sun casting long shadows, Jack's gaze fell upon Christie. She sat gently on the fence, a lone figure against the backdrop of the tree-lined path. In that moment, an adrenaline rush surged through Jack's veins, his senses heightened by the weight of his actions. Approaching Christie with calculated determination, Jack's hands trembled as he reached out, his gesture betraying fear and malice. In a swift motion, he seized her, binding her hands with makeshift restraints. As Christie's muffled protests filled the air, Jack's grip tightened, the gravity of his actions sinking in as he dragged her deeper into the surrounding woods. In a tranquil afternoon, the sunlight began to gradually fade behind the buildings, casting long shadows on the streets. In this setting, Jack assaulted Christie as she walked through a small alley, where only the whispers of the wind and the eerie silhouettes of trees prevailed. Christie, in a state of panic, began to flee into the dimming afternoon. Unfortunately, Jack quickly caught up and wielded a random branch from the ground as a weapon, striking her multiple times on the head. After Christie collapsed, Jack fled toward the main road, where the sunlight pierced through the storefronts and billboards. He hopped onto a bus to escape the crime scene. The next day, at dawn, the police escorted Jack to a secluded forest, where the darkness of the night before still lingered. Jack pointed out the spot where he committed the brutal act, providing details of the crime known only to the perpetrator. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was somber and tense, Jack's shallow breaths weighing heavily in the air. His emotions, ranging from fear to regret, and ultimately the agony of confession, made witnesses feel as though they were living through an unimaginable nightmare. The investigators simply provided him with all the necessary information. They just needed to ask leading questions containing the events of the case. For instance, they could ask if he had hit the victim with a piece of wood, and if Jack answered yes, the police could use that as a confession. A woman involved in treating Jack stated that under threat, he could confess to anything, just by hearing that he was facing the electric chair, and he would do anything the detectives asked. But not only that, supporters of Jack's innocence discovered that the police had brought him to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, a couple who later identified him among others at the police station, so they had seen Jack and knew he was a suspect. The police claimed the witnesses did not see Jack, but no one believed that. There were many other events that strongly raised suspicions about Jack's involvement. For example, the police couldn't find the bus driver or any passengers who saw Jack on the way to the city center, as he claimed in his confession. But the most crucial factor was the testimony of some people in the charity organization where Jack lived and worked. They affirmed they saw him around 1:30 in the afternoon on the day of the incident. If he really was there, he wouldn't have had any chance to take the bus to the suburban shopping center and commit the murder at 1:50 p.m., even if he left right after being seen by witnesses, as the bus would take at least 40 minutes to cover that distance. These facts not only cast doubt on Jack's guilt for many, but also lead to the conclusion that the police essentially coerced his confession. Even Christie's parents have begun to wonder whether he might not be the actual murderer. On September 9th, just 6 days after the conviction, about 70 people gathered outside the town hall to draw attention to the case and demand a thorough investigation. They formed a public committee with the goal of seeking justice. As a result, Jack found a new lawyer within a month. Several months later, a judge revoked Jack's confession and ordered a new trial. Now, the prosecution had to prove his guilt from scratch. Meanwhile, Christie's father, Norman Mills, conducted his own investigation from the beginning. He didn't trust the investigators to have done enough to find his daughter's killer. He decided not to rely on the police and began searching for answers on his own right after the murder. He and some neighbors went into the woods to inspect the area, where they found a pair of jeans and men's underwear stained with blood. They handed these items to the police, who initially overlooked them. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense lawyer had two primary and most important tasks: to prove Jack's innocence and to try to identify the real killer. In fact, they had a strong contender for this role, whom they considered the most likely suspect. He was the one who found Christie's body with his wife, and his name was Henry Newell. At the time of the murder, he was 25 years old. At the onset of the trial, Jack's lawyer had compiled an impressive list of reasons to suspect Henry in the murder case, and throughout the trial, this list only grew longer. Initially, Henry drew attention due to his criminal record. From a young age, he had been arrested numerous times for various offenses, serving 3 prison terms. At the time of Jack's trial, he was serving his 4th sentence, this time for burning down his own house for insurance money. The lawyer also reviewed evidence from Christie's case and found some highly suspicious details in Henry's statements. Henry claimed he found the victim's body and then threw a piece of blood-stained wood aside. He explained this by saying he was in shock at the time, but such an action still seemed peculiar. Why would he take the murder weapon and throw it away from the body without any clear reason? He also claimed he thought the victim was still alive, so he took off his shirt and pressed it against her face. This action raised questions about whether he was actually trying to stop bleeding, or if his shirt got bloodied while committing the murder, and he needed to justify it somehow. Jack's lawyer found a store clerk at the mall where Henry called the police, adding another layer of suspicion. She said Henry wasn't wearing a shirt when she saw him, just jeans. But when the police arrived, he had changed pants. She also mentioned Henry had a fresh bruise on his face, as if someone had hit him. When asked why she didn't immediately report this bruise, she said no one simply asked her. The police themselves overlooked this, but they missed it at the time. Henry agreed to take a polygraph test, but he vomited, disrupting the test. Therefore, the police couldn't arrange another test. Another witness, a neighbor of Henry's, saw many scratches on his hands on the night of the murder. He also remembered seeing a phone cord in Henry's garage, similar in color and shape to the one used to tie up the victim. However, the crucial thing is there's no evidence to support Henry's story about knowing Carol, Christie's 14-year-old friend, and them swimming naked together in a pool. At that time, Henry was 25, making this story strange and shocking to everyone involved in the case. However, there's no evidence to prove this story true. Although there's no concrete evidence of a relationship between Henry and Carol, there are indications they knew each other. Henry's wife, Pam, also testified in court. She recounted that everything happened exactly as they told the police from the first day. They went shopping, and their son wanted to go for a walk, so they went out. While they were in the woods, they found the victim's body. Pam mentioned that at that time, Henry was at home and only stepped outside for a short while to calm down some kids in the neighborhood, as someone was throwing fireworks into their yard. Carol also testified. She said she had never met Henry before. She was also asked about what she told the victim's mother, that things shouldn't escalate as they did, but Carol said she didn't remember saying that. Henry was also brought from prison to court to testify. He repeated his story without any changes and insisted that he had no involvement in the crime. One of the crucial moments of the trial was when the entire audio recording of Jack's interrogation was played. Upon review, it became clear to everyone that Jack was simply coerced into confessing by the police. Jack hardly spoke and seemed to not fully understand what the police wanted from him. However, that wasn't the most pivotal moment of the trial. On Thursday, another unexpected witness emerged, not anticipated by either the defense or Jack's lawyers. It was Bobby, Henry's own son, and his testimony truly shocked everyone following the case. The boy revealed that on that day, Henry actually left the house to chase away the kids throwing fireworks into their yard. However, he was absent for much longer than his mother claimed, more than half an hour, before Henry returned home. But when Henry returned after more than half an hour, he was no longer wearing his shirt and shoes, and he had scratches on his arms and face. Henry called Pam into another room for a conversation. Then they went outside and told Bobby they would go together to the shopping center. Upon arrival, Bobby's parents immediately led him to a path behind the shopping center. Bobby said he didn't ask his parents if they were going for a walk as they initially claimed. They entered the woods and almost immediately found Henry's shoes, one of which was slightly torn. Further away, they saw Christie's body. Bobby's mother instructed him never to tell anyone about what he had seen. Bobby said he only decided to tell the truth after talking to his biological father, who convinced him to do the right thing. The grandmother also testified in court and recounted a strange situation involving Henry. She, Henry, and Pam attended Christie's farewell ceremony on their way back. From the beginning, there was enough evidence to incriminate Henry for murder, but the investigators either didn't recognize it or simply overlooked it. His comment sparked a public outcry, reaching such heights. 2 days later, the prosecutor agreed to reopen the investigation into Christie's murder. However, investigators continued to rely on the initial information from Henry and Pam, believing they stumbled upon Christie's body in the woods with another man. Despite extensive efforts, the investigation yielded no results. Christie's family never gave up seeking justice. Once they sued Jack civilly, but the reasons for this were not straightforward. The man didn't believe in Jack's involvement in the murder, but this legal process granted him access to case files, allowing him to gather all available information. Unfortunately, this also didn't yield results until 2006. Christie's father passed away from cancer, with no progress in the investigation into her murder until 2013, when former lawyer John Allard decided to take interest in the case. He conducted his own investigation, reaching out to all parties involved, hoping to uncover new information. Christie's relatives handed him a box containing all her father's records he had collected until his death. He went through shopping malls, talking to dozens of people, and became convinced that the perpetrator behind Christie's murder was none other than Henry during his investigation. Henry was eventually convicted in 2018. Justice helped Christie's family uncover the truth after 41 years. They finally learned what happened on September 9, 1975. Newell and Christie were neighbors. He had seen her sitting on a guardrail behind the Graceland Shopping Center. They began a conversation. Afterward, Newell tried to make an advance on her. She rejected him and began screaming. He then tied her up and beat her to death with a 2x4. Although the police had sufficient evidence to charge Newell, all efforts were in vain because this evidence was presented after his death from cancer in 2013. Hopefully, the afterlife offers some hard justice for people who spent their earthly time committing evil acts. The Columbus Division of Police wishes to formally and publicly offer an apology to the family and close friends of Kim Mullins for the lack of action taken in pursuit of Henry Newell as a suspect by investigators 40 years ago, and any hardships that may have resulted from those actions.